Hello, Hidden Gems. We are here 2 nights in a row going live. You're welcome, but we could not see what I did there. We could not talk about the Sarah Boone sentencing. Holy cow. For those of you that don't know, Dr. John and I did a deep analysis actually of her interrogation video years ago, and we are back tonight talking about her sentencing today. It was major. We're going to go over many aspects of it. But first, we are going to start with a bit of Sarah Boone's own statement at her sentencing. Take a listen.
You may proceed, ma'am.
Kentu Sukuroi is a kind of Japanese ceramic style which means to repair with gold. In this tradition, when a ceramic piece breaks, an artisan will fuse the pieces back together again using liquid gold or gold dust lacquer. So rather than being covered up, the breaks become more obvious and a brilliant new piece of art emerges from the brokenness. It embraces flaws, weakness, and imperfections, and also teaches the essence of resilience. Every crack in a ceramic piece is a part of its history, and each piece becomes more beautiful because it has been broken. This is the wisdom of Kentu Sukuroi. In my wisdom and with all of my repairs, then, now, and ongoing, God is, has been, and will always be my artisan. All of my gold is forgiveness. This has held me together, made me shine brighter, and overcome the damage caused by George Torres, the Torres family, the justice system, Orange County Corrections Department, social media, scoundrel detectives, infamy, defamation, ongoing constitutional rights violations, second-degree murder, forced into being pro se. Just as gold is very precious, forgiveness is invaluable. Forgiveness is not an attempt to change or forget who, what, or how you've lived through to be so gold, but an act of grace, humility, and considerable self-compassion to be set free from sorrow. Withholding forgiveness denies your brilliance and adds even greater grief and deeper heartache, irreparable cracks on top of the already that no one deserves, no matter the pain or disappointment, untruths or injustice. It doesn't matter, as the more broken you are, even though now different than before, you've become more outstanding and more extraordinary. Above all, when you let go of blame, misunderstandings, excuses, give up your anger and cease from resentment, this is forgiven. And when you forgive, you heal. And when you heal, you move forward. My goal begins with George Torres, and every time he slapped me, kicked, punched, spit on, raped, stabbed, choked, laughed at, pushed, pulled, dragged, whipped, tripped.
All right. Thoughts, Dr. John?
Yeah.
And of course, we watched the whole sentencing today together. That was our afternoon date. But what are your thoughts?
I have witnessed a lot of these types of statements, and I can't say I've seen one quite like this. So it was truly astonishing to watch, and that's precisely why we're doing it. By the way, I'm calling tonight a holiday special. So 2 nights in a row is unusual, but we'll refer to these impromptu shows as holiday specials. So this is our post Thanksgiving holiday special, thanks to Sarah Boone. But it's fascinating. I think that's why we're here. We want to talk about it. It's really, I think it'll be really interesting to critique this and to think about it and talk about it. I want to start with an issue that was brought up later, and prior to the actual sentence being given by the judge, there was some discussion about the offer, the initial offer the state made to Sarah Boone, which was 15 years. So they offered her initially, early on, she was offered a plea deal, which included a charge of manslaughter, 15 years. And as part of that deal, she had to take full responsibility for her crime. And so she's given this deal. Now, keep in mind that in most state systems, most state penitentiary systems, if you're a model inmate, which I presume she probably would be, if you're a model inmate, typically you get a lot of good time. And so that means your sentence gets cut dramatically. So if you're a model inmate and you don't get into trouble and you attend classes or do whatever you're supposed to do, typically you're going to get maybe a reduction of 40-50% off your sentence. So that means, all told, she could be in for 7.5, 8 years, maybe more. She'll have to appear before parole boards, right? But
pretty good.
But right, so she could get, if she takes that deal, she's probably looking at something like 8 years, give or take. She has a child, right? That means that she would get out in a reasonable amount of time, that she could still spend the larger portion of her life with her child. And she refuses that deal.
Correct.
She turns it down. And I think, so starting with that, it's important to start, I think, talking about that, because it really starts giving us a glimpse into who Sarah Boone is. The question I have, and I'm sure most of our viewers will know me by now, the question I have is, why does if we want to understand Sarah Boone, we have to understand, why does she refuse that deal? This is the key to understanding Sarah Boone. Why is it that she refuses that deal? And the obvious answer. So you and I did a reaction video of the interrogation, and I talk a lot about it in that particular video. I'm not going to rehash all of that, but I think the short answer is, a lot of people throw around the term narcissism for Sarah Boone, and she even mentions it in her own apology today. In her own sentencing, she talks about how people mischaracterize her as a narcissist, and some of her character witnesses, they say the same thing. There's one in particular, Lana. It's Lana Alpert, talks about how she's not fairly portrayed when people call her a narcissist. So I don't want to use the term narcissism here, because I don't really know what her diagnosis would be. We know a diagnosis from a psychologist who spoke today, who did not do any personality testing, which is really peculiar. But I think the reason that psychologist didn't do personality testing is because that psychologist worked for the defense. And if she did diagnose with a personality disorder, that would not have been in the defense's favor.
Right.
So one of the things, by the way, when I do work for defense attorneys, one of the things I tell them up front is, I'm going to do full personality testing. You may not like the results, but if your defendant is a psychopath, I'm going to tell you your defendant's a psychopath. You don't have to use that. You when you hire me to do if you hire me to work for the defense, I'm going to tell you what I believe is the most accurate case. And again, it's up to the defense attorney whether they want to use it or not, but I'm going to do full testing. And in this particular case, no personality tests were performed. And because of that, I presume you can get to a diagnosis of personality disorder without testing, but it helps a whole lot to support your case if you did testing. And there was no personality testing done. So the diagnoses were PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and alcohol abuse disorder. So in other words, post-traumatic stress and alcoholism. She said that she has a lifelong history of anxiety. All of those were interesting, but putting those aside for the moment, this question about why she doesn't take that deal is really the key here, in the sense that, so I'm not going to use the term narcissism, I'm going to use the term hubris.
Okay.
I think the reason she doesn't take that deal, we talked about this in the interrogation video, is because at least in that video, and now presumably, she clearly doesn't take full responsibility for committing this crime. I think we saw this in her character witnesses today, that the common theme among her character witnesses was what a wonderful person she is and how giving she is, right? That I know Sarah Boone, she's a really good person. She would do anything for you, right? And that's sort of how Sarah Boone sees herself.
Correct.
Sarah Boone is incapable of seeing herself as someone who could commit murder. And so the reason she doesn't take that deal is because her ego is too invested in seeing herself in a particular way. There's a theory I talk about by William Swan called self-verification theory, which is completely relevant to that analysis. And I talk a lot about it in the reaction to the interrogation video. But I think that's so you're seeing this hubris here. You're seeing it. You saw it in the interrogation video. You see it repeatedly with her. I think people call it narcissism, and they're diagnosing that, or we're getting all these armchair diagnoses about narcissism, and that may very well be correct, but I just wouldn't know enough to come up with that diagnosis. But certainly the reason she doesn't think she did anything wrong. She sees herself as the victim, so she's not going to take a deal that's going to get her out in 7 or 8 years because she doesn't think that fits her. Mm-hmm. She doesn't think that applies to her. And you get a little bit of a wake-up call, of course, when a jury comes back and says, no, that does apply to you. You did commit murder, right? And so that's the reality that she's confronting today in this sentencing hearing, is that she's now a convicted murderer, second-degree murderer, and she has to come to terms with that reality, right? And so this is the first chance we really get to see her dealing with or coping with that new reality. My guess is, interestingly enough, if you went back to her with the manslaughter deal and said, hey, we'll give you this deal, this is on the table, but you need to take full responsibility, I'm not sure she would take it.
Even now, knowing that she'd get life.
Yeah, I mean, she might for her child. I mean, knowing what she knows now, she might. But the way I would describe her apology, let's call it an apology. The way I would describe her apology is she was apologetic. She's right.
Apology, yeah.
She was apologetic, but not remorseful. And I want to talk just briefly also about something that's really important here, and that is that I've worked with offenders, both violent and sex offenders, for many, many years, doing forensic evaluations and working with them in groups, in group therapy situations. I've worked with adolescents. I've worked with adults. I've seen hundreds of offenders over the years, and one large component of my therapy groups and its best practices in treating offenders is offenders have to complete what's called a victim empathy letter. And the basis of this letter is essentially to show empathy to their victim and to all of the victims that are impacted by either a sex offense or a violent crime or a murder, whatever it is. That the purpose of that letter is essentially to try to get the offender to deal with what I consider to be one of the most critical issues in any offense, and that is that the subjectification of victims, right? The victim empathy letter is the antidote to that objectification or that dehumanization of victims that's quite common among most criminals. And I'll say this about these victim empathy letters. I've had offenders that have taken years. I've had offenders who they can't write the letter. It is too hard for them. Not only do they not understand empathy, but just the process of engaging in engaging with that letter and grappling with that letter and writing that letter and even thinking about empathy is so hard for them that most of them take at least a year to sit down and write a draft. Many of them take several years to write a draft. Like many of them, it's just not a language they know. And the reason this is important is because empathy, if you look at cluster B personality disorders, the lack of empathy is one of the defining features of almost all of them. And it's one of the defining features of psychopathy. So a psychopath lacks empathy, a narcissist lacks empathy, a histrionic personality disorder diagnosis lacks empathy. Most of the destructive personality disorders, they lack empathy. And when you look at this, so this is important because when you look at this apology today, I also want to say that she's apologetic, but not empathic. And that's a really critical distinction because this whole thing, she starts this whole thing with an abstraction, right? Like she starts this whole thing with the broken vase and Japanese art and, how that's gold and we're all broke. Like it's, I mean, it's interesting, but it lacks any emotional resonance. It's purely an intellectual exercise, right? So that's one of the right out of the blocks with Sarah Boone. You see this inability to connect emotionally and empathically with the people in that room. And so in many ways, like that's what I'm trying to do with my victim empathy letters with offenders. Like they're not going to get out of my groups unless they have some capacity to show empathy and to connect with other human beings as people, as they are, and to understand the damage they've done to other people and to families. Right? Yeah. So you can be apologetic, but you can lack empathy. You can. Mm-hmm. I know, for example, if she gave that speech in one of my groups, they would have just completely annihilated her.
Well, I kind of agree with Troublemaker Baker, but is she apologetic? I don't think she is. I mean, well, she says the word sorry, but what is she sorry that the mother raised him wrong? Like she's sorry that people judge her. She's sorry that social media is a sick place. She's sorry that she has to forgive herself for being abused.
Right. I mean, well, right. I mean, it's a good. It's kind of the point I'm making that the apology is empty. Right. That's exactly what I'm saying. Like an apology with a victim empathy letter without empathy is not a victim empathy letter. Right. An apology without empathy is not a real apology. It's not a heartfelt apology. So yeah, I think Troublemaker Baker's making the same point that I'm making. She's just expressing it differently.
Right. You're saying there was, even though she says the words sorry, there is no empathy or there is no statement with empathy here.
Right. Empathy. Exactly. It's a hollow apology. Just like she's apologetic in the most cursory, hollow way. She's the way I described it was she's apologetic but not empathic. She's apologetic but not remorseful. She's apologetic but not responsible. She doesn't take responsibility for this crime at all. And the prosecutor points that out. When the prosecutor makes the final plea to the judge about sentencing, he essentially says that. He says, look, we offered her a deal of manslaughter and she didn't take it because she couldn't take responsibility. And now look at the statement by her. Nothing's changed.
Right.
And so, yeah, I agree that the apology was she uses the word.
It was an insult cloaked as apology. I agree with that at one point, sort of apologizing that, his mother was a terrible mom and made him an abuser. I mean, there were many of those moments. Right. Yeah. Gaslighting, all these people mentioning, this is the classic. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry that you people on YouTube speak badly of me. I'm sorry that Hidden True Crime is a channel you listen to. Yes. That's her apology.
Right. She lambastes social media and YouTube channels like ours. And then at the end she says, and we'll play this in a second, but she says, still no one knows me.
There you
I
go.
thought that was a fascinating line. Like, social media got it all wrong. Everyone got it all wrong. Still no one knows me. But the problem is she doesn't know herself. The problem is, I think that, whatever her personality disorder diagnosis is, assuming she has one, maybe she doesn't. She seems like she might. I would guess that part of that is that she really doesn't know herself very well. She's very articulate. Her writing is thoughtful. Right there, like, she's someone who, in many ways, the quality of what she's writing is disconnected from what she's saying. It's almost as if it's bombastic in the sense that she likes to hear herself talk. She's writing words that are kind of grandiose, and it's almost like she's trying to impress people, but when you listen carefully, there's not a lot of substance there. And also, she's throwing out all these generalizations about social media. She calls social media organized crime, right? It would never occur to her, apparently, that social media is part of free speech and and freedom of expression. To her, if you're making any comments about her, it's criminal.
Yes. Did you have time codes? More time codes, or?
Yeah, let's play it's roughly 139:15-ish.
Okay.
Let's play the part where she does talk about social media, because that was fascinating.
Here it is. Let me.
And after all the times Sarah tried to, by asking for help from all of us and so many times. Another great contributor of my gold is social media, with its greed, insensitivity, deception, obvious exploitation, and advantageous gain from my criminal case as a whole, and for sentencing me by anticipation as a result of ignorance and hate, conjured and fabricated by the organized crime that is social media, which condemned me in the court of global public opinion since the beginning. My family law case is the new prey waiting to be picked apart and pillaged from me being made infamous by social media in my criminal case. It simply seems I cannot forgive and be forgiven and move forward. Social media has made me a pariah. It has caused great oppression and undeniable disadvantages, especially by broadcasting and manipulating my cases online. In my criminal case, as a result, my opportunities to be given a fair, proper, and uninfluenced successful conclusion was heavily depleted and poisoned. I forgive them. Also, all of the media tycoons for not having a life of their own, trying so desperately to make themselves seem so right by making me appear so wrong. Forgiveness for prejudgment, ridiculous theatrics, lies, making and taking blood money from my and others' misfortunes, accidents, and catastrophes. It's all over their hands and their keyboards. And even after all that's been said and done, theorized, hypothesized, scrutinized, and blasphemed, in my case, still no one knows me.
Okay, you can pause.
In the
So, I mean, of course, as a YouTube channel ourselves, that was interesting. I don't know that I would use the term social media tycoons to describe us, but that's the category she's using. A couple of thoughts here. I think she's purely the victim.
Yes.
Right. Number one. Number two, she's portraying all social media and all YouTube as negative, as the villain, right? Like, she's clearly resorting to kind of this stereotype of everyone on social media is negative. Everyone on social media is incapable of fair portrayal of her. Everyone is out to get her. So that's interesting. I mean, in fairness to her, there are social media outlets that are probably very biased. I mean, we try not to be. We all have our biases, but and I mean, there's certainly there's a fair there. I'm sure there was a fair amount of vilification of her.
Yeah.
So she was vilified quite a bit, and
As
none of
Vanessa
that.
stated, this is 4 years of built up anger.
Yeah, none of that helped her. I mean, whether that vilification seeped into a jury pool or into the judicial system, I don't know. I mean, it could have. There could have been some jurors that knew the case and knew her and listened to and consumed social media. I'm not sure, but I mean, I kind of understand her point to some degree, but it's just the hyperbole, it's the extremity of that statement. Like it's all negative. There's no there's no presumption that social media might have some good qualities that our channel might in fact at times attempt to do some good things, right? So or to present some analyses that are even-handed and balanced. And I will say this, like, I mean, I do have empathy for her. I do. I from her interrogation to now, I actually think there has been a little bit of growth. I don't think she would have apologized at all. I think she was quite defiant. 3 or 4 years ago, I think she was really defiant and really. I don't think you would have gotten anything near what she did today. So I do think there has been some growth, and I mean, I understand her point of view.
Which part?
Just being portrayed as a villain, just being kind of
the dehumanization that can happen when we're
right,
all behind keyboards.
Right, but I mean, she's referring to exactly the online mob that's capable of just presenting things in a particular manner, and I mean, unfortunately, I don't think her critique lands here because she's portraying herself as too much of a victim.
Correct. But she's improved since the interrogation that we
right.
And you assess that. We assess that on our channel for anyone that wants to see that, or if any moderator wants to put a link to that. John did an assessment on her interrogation 4 years ago. And so you're saying you have seen as a psychologist some improvement since that moment.
Yeah, I don't think you would have. Now, maybe it's the fact that she was found guilty that created this type of statement, but I don't think she would have been capable of making a statement of this nature at all 4 years ago. So I think she was so angry and so defiant. I mean, and again, somebody just said that anger, I think, has built up considerably over 4 years. I mean, she's still really angry.
Right.
But she, she has changed a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's something, right? I mean, there's a little bit of growth there. I mean, she's not a lot, but I mean, she's capable of an apology. I don't think she would have been doing that 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 2 years ago.
Kylie says, as a survivor of DV coercive control, I have felt empathy for her too at times, but then she goes and she says stuff like she did today. I also want to point out something that somebody is saying here, which I think is important. Tess saying, well, what about battered women not getting any sympathy? Right. He tried to, and yes, she did apologize. He was an abuser. I mean, these are some strong words, but what about that?
That was my next thought, is that
okay.
That was my next thought, is actually the most poignant part of her statement was when she talked about all the abuse she endured. It was a real testament to battered women and to what they experience and what they go through and how difficult it is. I mean, that, I believe her. I mean, I was it's hard. It was hard to listen to that part because it does ring true. And so this is not a case of there is a very real sense here in which she is a victim.
Mhm. Which is why there was perhaps a plea deal on the table though,
Right.
right? Like,
Exactly.
because of
Exactly.
this, let's go Gypsy Rose here for a second. But I mean, here there's a plea deal for you. And because you can't take away that you essentially buried somebody alive, which is pretty much, a crime, in my opinion.
Right. Exactly.
Made someone suffer, tortured them. Never, it doesn't matter how big of a victim you are, but there was a plea deal. And that was probably why, because of any possible victimization that she did have, but she rejected that. She was like, I am right. I am not wrong in any way. She had no empathy for him. I think you're right. And this is what you're saying, but you're saying this is all you need to know about Sarah Boone. She did not take this plea deal.
Right. And well, not just that. I mean, but I think, I think like many of these situations, it is complicated. Like I do think she's a victim. I mean, she gave a lot of detail about the abuse she experienced. And it's hard to, I mean, I guess there might be a question about of credibility. I mean, like how much of that is completely accurate? I don't know. Right. Like ultimately juries determine that sort of thing, or judges determine that's in like with sentence mitigation. The judge would have to take into account all of those elements of her abuse and figure out, okay, given that she experienced this, how much should I weigh that in terms of sentencing her, right? And PTSD, given that she's experienced or diagnosed with PTSD, how much should the judge weigh that in terms of should the judge reduce the sentence because of those elements? I mean, I don't know. There's no simple answer to that. Some judges are sympathetic to that, some aren't. But right. To bury someone alive and to video it on her phone for 7 minutes with somebody, with another human being pleading for his life, right? Like she can be a victim of domestic violence to a very large degree, which she appears to have been. And it's not going to excuse torturing another human being. It's not going to excuse that type of sadistic treatment of another human being. There's
Correct.
other way, by and large, the system doesn't value or reward vigilante justice.
No.
Right. And so,
No.
I think of another case now that's kind of, I mean, it's different, but like the Menendez brothers now are kind of back in the public eye in terms of, arguing that they were victims of abuse and that their trial wasn't fair because the extent of their abuse wasn't taken into account. But you still have to grapple with the fact that they showed up in a living room behind their parents with shotguns and literally blew them to smithereens, right? Like there's other ways of handling that.
Well, this is what I've always said, and I said it with Gypsy Rose too, and a lot of people don't realize that this is what you do for work, for your career. This is what you've been doing for 30 years. You go and you try to understand a criminal and why they did
Right.
what they did. And oftentimes that begins with their childhood. And there are
Right.
many, many criminals who have been victims at one time or another and have been abused, and they have had sad lives. And you feel empathy for the criminals that you interview. In fact, I can attest to this. When John will go and interview a criminal, he'll come back with a lot of empathy after hearing their life story. And then John starts writing the report and he gets angrier. It's interesting to watch the transition for John. He'll cut.
Yeah.
You clearly put on your empathy hat for the interview. You're feeling it. You feel bad for their lives. Then you come back and you start to write up what they did, why they did it, and you get angry. The majority of all criminals have had sadness or abuse in their lives, and it doesn't ever excuse a crime. And you can have empathy for the child they were, or empathy for Gypsy Rose, and I'm bringing her up as an example because we've talked about her a lot on our channel, or the brothers, like, but this is part of you don't excuse the crime. So first off, I just also want to clarify, by us stating that you have empathy for victims of abuse, we are never ever excusing what she did or what somebody did. But I find it interesting, I have to say, where some victims receive empathy and people should think we should excuse their crimes and others don't. She can be a victim of abuse, and we can absolutely think that what she did is disgusting and be put away for life and be shocked at her victim statement. I guess sorry, that was a bit of a rant, but I think I'm looking at chat, and I wanted to say that.
Right. And I think actually not you're if I'm not following the chat, but what you're saying is completely relevant to what she said. That, she's trying to argue that people see it reductively as all or none. They see it either you're a victim or you're not. And either, if you have empathy for a criminal who commits a heinous crime, then somehow that's not allowed. You have to vilify this person or dehumanize this person. Otherwise you're right. You're somehow, I don't know, being unfair, or you're not assessing the situation accurately. But that's not true. You can have both. You can have empathy and still see a crime as being heinous.
Correct. Any other time codes, babe?
Let's go to the one right after that. I think we're gonna. There's I want to watch a succession of these statements here, so I think it's the one right after.
I don't have the
140, 140, 50, roughly 1 hour,
Okay.
40 minutes, 50.
Here we go.
And I forgive myself for not choosing my life sooner, for not being more brave, vigilant, bolder, and outspoken, stronger, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, for being hopeless, desperate, simple-minded, weak, and inexperienced. I forgive myself for not realizing I was enduring a life of domestic violence and that the vicious cycle of never ends. I had nothing to compare to. I've never been hit by a man ever before in my life. I was raised hitting a woman was wrong and should never happen. No excuse. I forgive myself for not escaping permanently, for not fighting back sooner to save myself, my son, my dogs, home, and car. Having
Okay, you can
20/20
pause it.
hindsight, thinking of
For not fighting back sooner is a really interesting word choice there, I'll just say, knowing what she ended up doing to him. I
Right.
apologize for not fighting back sooner. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, this part is interesting. I mean, in theory, it shows a little bit of insight. When she says that, I think in particular, for not choosing her life sooner. I mean, it doesn't. You still have this motif of victimization.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that portraying herself as a victim is going to really anger a lot of people, and including myself. I mean, she's not a victim. I mean,
She's not. I mean,
she
in
has
this
some
situation.
victimization in her history, but yes, like in this situation, she's not the victim. She can't argue that all of those incidents from her past led to this exact moment.
Yes.
That's what she's doing. But this idea of not choosing her life sooner, I mean, I think if I'm wearing my therapist hat and I hear that, I feel like, assuming that she was open to change or to therapy, like these are the types of insights that a therapist could build on, right? Like what does she mean by that? Is she, does she mean it, first of all? Right? Is she sincere about that? I don't know if she is, but you could argue that this is just another way for her to portray herself as a victim. Or you could say that if she means this, then I think this opens the door potentially to some change. So I think it's interesting. Also, it's really, to me, it's really obnoxious and kind of maddening that this whole forgiveness thing Like, I forget, like, she's kind of in the power position, right? She's in that, she's the one dishing out forgiveness. She's the one determining who to forgive and how, right? Like, that's
Right. She's
unusual.
God. It's like
Right,
Lori Vallow. She's
she's in a
God.
she's in a godlike position, and she's bringing in God in this statement all the time. Exactly. I was going to say it's kind of deity like, in the sense that, usually forgiveness is something that you accept from other people. It's not something that you determine. In fact, that's, in offender work that I do, sometimes I go through these family reunification processes, and family reunification typically involves an offender who committed crimes against someone in the family, and then they go through treatment, and then they want to go live with the victim again. And part of that process is the victim empathy letter that I talked about earlier, and it's an apology. But another part of that process is that the victim is in the room with the offender. The victim gets to determine whether they accept the forgiveness of the offender. The offender is not allowed to forgive, because it's not their choice. Right? You don't force forgiveness on other people. The victim, or the person that was harmed, is the one who has to accept the forgiveness and be willing to forgive the offender. And here you have the offender pushing the forgiveness on the victims.
Right, exactly. As
the
Moonlight View
family.
says, but George was the victim here. Exactly.
Right, exactly. That's my point. Right.
Yes.
And that's where it's over the top. Like this, I forgive myself. I forgive George. I forget. Like, that's not her call.
Yes.
And again, it's so, but like, again, if there's hubris here, that's the epitome of hubris.
Right.
And that was something, maybe I should have said that earlier, but that was something that really rubbed me the wrong way right from the start. Was this whole, she's couching this whole thing, she's framing this whole thing in terms of forgiveness, and then she's the one with the power to forgive.
Yes.
Right, and that's not how it works.
No, thank you. It's maddening.
As a matter of fact, if I was doing a family reunification process and the offender came in the room, read the empathy letter, and then asked for forgiveness. And keep in mind, the offender is the one who harmed another human being. So even though it's been years, typically, they still are the one in a position of power. They're not allowed to ask for forgiveness because it's not their place. But if they do that, they disqualify themselves in that process. If they say to the victim, you need to forgive me, right? Some of them have said that. Then all of a sudden we're back to square one. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
We talk about, before an offender goes into a family reunification meeting or group, I make it clear to the offender that if you're going to bring up forgiveness, it needs to come from the victim. And so that was definitely a really fascinating part of this process.
I'm reminded, I just have to bring up how everybody is saying, and I completely agree when they're like, we're talking about it. Here she is, the perpetrator, saying that she forgives the victim. It's maddening. It is maddening to hear. And she is the perpetual victim. I want to point out something that I've always pointed out. When John and I actually first started dating, he suggested I read the book, The Sociopath Next Door. He was trying to help me get past something. And I read it by Dr. Martha Stout, and she states in this book, I was trying to find the exact quote, but I didn't find it in time. She states, many people ask her, what is it about a sociopath? How can you pinpoint a sociopath or someone that has these antisocial traits? And she says that people seem to think there's some nefarious thing, that they'll have horns coming out of their heads or they'll look sinister. And she said, actually, it's an appeal to our sympathy, that person that you need to be most wary of is a person that is always a victim, that is always looking for sympathy and always is looking for your sympathy. and she refers to it as pity play. So I just want to point out that everyone pointing out how she is the victim, I can't not ever forget Dr. Martha Stout's words in her example of pity play. I just want to share that.
Right. You see this as a classic pity play.
Yeah, I see this as classic pity play. That's what I see, is just always the victim.
Right. I agree. You know, and trying to take control of this notion of forgiveness, which is how she starts her apology, is really maddening. You know, it's really it even if someone can articulate it, I think most people listening to that have the feeling that somehow that's off or that's wrong. And so hopefully I just explained why someone might feel that way.
Here's a great quote from the book. I am sure that if the devil existed, he would want us to feel very sorry for him. End quote. Martha Stout. So that's all I can think of when I watch her.
Yeah.
Anyway, next thing you want to listen to.
Yeah,
John?
let's go to 141.50.
Okay. So I'm trying, I keep going. There we go.
George threatened me with so many times before. I forgive myself for falling in love with a monster, and no matter how grotesque he may become, I still loved him, hoped, and forgave. I tried breaking the spell so he wouldn't be a monster anymore. I saw who he was inside. George made me then, now, and always love him for all of his cracks also. We made each other our own brilliant pieces of art from the cracks and repairs. Unfortunately, not all cracks can be. In all of my forgiveness, George is my greatest lesson and will forever be a part of me. I think of him every day and still speak to him when alone on the rec yard. I ask his forgiveness and that he looks for me at the gates of heaven so I can tell him how sorry I am endlessly and that I never stopped loving him. In all of it and still. When I first came to jail, I put my mat under my bed and cried all day and all night for months, only falling asleep from being so exhausted with grief. I wrote him letters. I wrote his family
You can stop.
and his daughters, apologizing for asking and
Okay.
So that statement really stood out to me, that she forgives herself for falling in love with a monster. I mean, if you're going to stand up in court, and this speaks to my issue around the empathy. If you're going to stand up in court, or if you're going to give a statement in court that's televised, that's pushed out to the entire world, and you're going to refer to someone that you murdered as a monster, that's not going to be popular.
She just called
Like-
the victim. She just calls the person she buried alive. I can't not say that because it's exactly what she did, who she mocked while he was suffering, a monster.
Right. And I mean, so as much as I try to have empathy for her, you know, it's these types of statements that really undermine that capacity, because if she wants to understand, there's also this absolute lack of insight, right? Like, if she wants to understand why social media is vilifying her and why social media is so enthralled with this crime and why there's such dislike of her, then she needs to look at these types of statements. She
Right.
forgives herself for falling in love with the monster, and then she says that she tried breaking the spell so that he wouldn't be a monster anymore. So in other words, she's the magician that can break the spell. She's the sorceress that can break the spell. And like, this is Beauty and the Beast.
Yes.
We've seen this before, right? She's gonna tame the monster, break the spell. She's gonna be, she's got this really simplistic notion of relationships and how this all works, and how she's acknowledging that she sees him as a monster. If you want to understand why she doesn't open that suitcase, then I would strongly urge people to look at this statement. She's telling you, even after 4 years, she's telling you how she perceives George.
Mm-hmm.
She sees George as a monster. She's telling the world that.
This is her motive. Yeah, that's why she did it.
That's why she did it, right? This is why she doesn't open the suitcase. Because she says it right here. She tells us herself she fell in love with the monster. And
she also says she wished. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
She sees it as her job to reform that monster, to transform that monster from the beast, so that the beast becomes a prince, so that she can love him again. So it has nothing to do with her, right? I mean, her role is to transform the beast, but she married this monster. So if she just happens to murder him, then he was a monster. He was a monster anyway. And again, like, if I try to find moments where I can relate to her and empathize with her, and then she says stuff like this, and then she wonders why social media is so negative and
shocked. Yeah.
Right. I mean, okay, Sarah, here it is. This is why social media is upset with you, because you murdered a monster, and now when you're supposed to get up and apologize and show empathy, you call him, the person you murdered, you call him a monster.
Well, and as you point out, if you want to know why she did it, she dehumanized him then, and she still years later has dehumanized him. He is a monster to her, and I can't help but go back to that slip. She said, "I wish I had fought back sooner." She has no regrets. Her only regret is that she didn't fight back sooner. I don't know. Troublemaker Baker's also saying, but she loved being able to control him. Exactly. She did. Talk about controlling. And you're right, Kay Louise. Sarah is a monster the second she didn't unzip that suitcase. Yeah.
Right. So there's an element of projection. Exactly. That she actually transformed into, she's the one who transformed into the monster.
Yes.
And then she has the nerve, by the way. So she makes the statement about him being a monster. And then she has the nerve later to say, well, what if I had been the one who was killed? I'd be a hero.
I know. That was upsetting. Anyway, yeah, what's your next? Should we listen to that, or what's your next soundbite? Because that was a shocking moment. Agreed, Jeannie Marie.
So let's go. I didn't have the time code on this one, but it's going to be not too far after the last.
Just keep playing it.
Yeah, just keep playing it for a bit. I think it's not
asking for their forgiveness, but due to fear that my life or sons would be jeopardized, I did not send. I am sorry. I cannot begin to fathom any of their grief and sadness. Please forgive me.
After climbing a monster.
Almost everything reminds me of him. Seeing my stab wound, especially every day, especially. It truly reminds me that all I really did live through. George haunts me. He is everywhere. I believe because I do still love him, think of him, and miss his laugh the most. In my heart, I know he is with me and understands that this tragedy was not intentional. I hope everyone can, his family foremost. I didn't mean for this to happen. Please wholeheartedly know that, and always, I would never. Forgive me, George. Forgive me, Torres family. Forgive me, Judge Cranick. To the entire planet, please forgive me. I graciously and humbly ask for consideration.
Talk about grandiose, too. Forgive me, entire planet, because you're all watching and care about me. I am God. Sorry, that's just so...
Right, I made a note of, to the entire planet, please forgive me. I'm like, what? So you're broadcasting this to the entire, or this is being broadcast to the entire planet, and you call the person you murdered a monster? Do you not understand the implications of that? And there's this constant underlying theme, by the way, of I despise this person. There's this constant conflict between, what she says constantly, he hurt me. He's a monster. I hate him. But yet I love him. I will always love him. Like there's this dialectical tension, this conflict between that she can't clarify.
When she states
Between absolutely despising him and belittling him and hating him, and then going to the other side just as quickly, like love, admiration, soulmate. She doesn't say soulmate, but like just, there's this constant back and forth between her emotions that she can't clarify. And I think part of the reason she can't clarify her emotions is because she doesn't really have much capacity to feel.
I just can't get over the moment where she said, oh, but you thought it was just going to be this moment of, I think of him every day as in I miss him. I think of him every time I feel the stab wound in my leg. I mean, as someone pointed out, all of her is offensive. This is a victim impact statement, or should be, if she wants a better sentencing. And she's like, watch this. Watch how offensive I can be.
Right. This isn't the lack of empathy in her so-called apology, I think is really, even though the judge may not have been able to articulate it, I think that's the reason he gave her life.
Yeah.
So the judge ended up giving her a life sentence, which, by the way, a life sentence isn't totally clear. I don't know the guidelines in Florida, but in many states, a life sentence doesn't necessarily mean life in prison. It might. Life without the possibility of parole, that's a true life sentence. A life sentence could be 10 years. It depends on the state. Again, I don't know Florida, but a life
Florida
sentence could be,
allegedly you have to serve 85% of your time in Florida now, according to commenters. Thanks, guys, for bringing the Florida law facts to us.
but life could be whatever the minimum is. I don't know. You'd have to see her charging documents to see what the ceiling, what the floor and the ceiling are. I don't know the minimum for life in Florida, but in some states it can be as little as 10 years.
Yeah.
So
In Florida, it's 85%. So
no, 85% of what?
Your
Of how much?
sentence.
I know,
have
but
to serve.
we don't know her sentence.
Life
Her
is
sentence-
life. Her sentence is life.
No, but that life doesn't mean life.
In Florida, it does. Look at all these comments. Everybody's telling us life is life in Florida. No parole. Life is life.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
I'm telling you, it's
So
85% of your entire sentence in Florida.
Okay. So
People have been telling us the whole life.
Okay, but so in other words, a life sentence in Florida means without the possibility of parole.
Correct.
Okay. Because in Nevada, that's not true. In Nevada,
Correct. Right. So
in
we're
Nevada,
talking Florida.
a life sentence has.
We hear
a minimum.
everyone. Everybody's writing it over and over. We've gotten about
I got it.
100 in a row.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Because I'm used to when judges give life sentences. I'm used to if it means without the possibility of parole. I'm used to them saying that. But I guess in Florida, that's a given. So thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So there is no parole. Life is life.
So if you wanted to continue with the part where she says that she'd be the hero.
I don't have the time. I only have the time codes of the two.
It's going to be
you told me
not
about.
far from. It's going to be shortly after the last part.
So just play from where I left off.
Yeah, just keep. Yeah.
Okay.
For forgiveness to be extended instead of judgment, for reconciliation and restoration for all of us to move forward. My apology is profuse and ceaseless. Allow me, please, to brush off the muck, wipe the blood off of my face, and fix the cuts in my skin. I ask for understanding in what really happened and for how long. For second chances, repentance, and redemption to advocate for all domestic violence survivors, to help them overcome, heal, and still hope, always, to make their voices heard, to confidently walk with all of their scars on the outside and the inside, to help them not ever become a casualty of domestic violence as so many others, to stop the abuse and maltreatment before it's too late. There is always hope, and you can survive. In my soft-spoken conclusion, I ask this: would I be the darling mother, celebrated woman of the year, if it were I who died? How many daughters, mothers, sisters, aunts, grandmothers, nieces, and friends have been because they did? I am a survivor. Learn to do
Okay.
good, seek justice,
Okay.
rebuke oppressors, defend
This is where she's about to end. Should we just conclude it or?
Okay, sure.
Okay.
the fatherless, plead for the widow. Isaiah 117,
Oh,
all
geez.
encompassing, protect the abused.
Ms. Boone, is that the end of your written statement?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, gathering your thoughts, did you want to make an oral statement?
So, yeah, I mean, first of all, I made note of that she says, my apology is profuse and ceaseless. I mean, talk about a meaningless statement, right? Like she's trying to sound profound. She's trying to sound like that's significant, but when you break it down, like there's no emotional content there. Like if you're an apology should have some capacity to connect emotionally with the victim's family or the audience, right? But when you throw out stuff like my apology is profuse and ceaseless, it's essentially meaningless. It's like a total abstraction. It's her trying to listen to her grandiosity, right? Like it's really interesting. It's a peculiar thing to say.
People are also pointing out that she never even, apologized to her son. Like she didn't apologize to anyone that she should have apologized to. It's just, yeah.
No, I know. Yeah, right. Her son, exactly. I mean, that was the first thing I said is that if she takes that manslaughter deal on the table 4 years ago or 3.5 years ago, she gets to have a life with her son.
Yeah.
But her hubris is so profound that she would rather be right and to show the world that she's a good person, apparently, than to take a deal where she clearly knows she murdered someone.
Yeah. Clearly.
But she'd rather fight the charges and show that she's the world that she's right and that she's a good person, apparently, than spend the rest of her life with her child.
Right. And as teacher timeout says, she could have taken 15 years.
Exactly. Which, by most accounts, well, again, I don't know Florida, so maybe in Florida she'd have to serve a larger percentage of time, but in many states with good time sentences get reduced roughly 40 to 60%, give or take. So that would put her at 7 or 8 years potentially. So the other thing that her comment about what if she had died, that she thinks that, that's, again, that's it's so bizarre that she essentially says if she would have died, she would have been the martyr.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't use that term, but that's how she portrays it.
It is very Lori Vallow-esque. I mean, I guess criminals do have similar thought processes, but right. The martyr.
Right. Lori certainly has a lot of grandiosity. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure about the delusional component here. I don't see Sarah Boone as necessarily being delusional, whereas Lori clearly is a little more extreme in that regard. But yeah, I mean, there are definite similarities. One of the problems with hubris is that it really blinds you to reality, right? Like it really interferes with your capacity to assess the world and to connect with other people, and especially if it's more extreme.
We have to conclude soon, but I can't go without discussing the internet true crime sleuth pen pal testifying.
Okay.
Can we play a bit of that?
Sure.
I mean, because that was an interesting moment too. I've never talked about. I just have to point the irony out. That here she is bad mouthing the true crime community, social media, all this stuff, and yet one of the people giving a victim impact or testifying, giving a statement on her behalf, is a pen pal she met through the true crime community that decided to write her. That's the first. Never seen that. They've known each other for 11 months. Keep in touch on Sarah's tablet. And let's play this.
Heartfelt condolences to everyone here affected by this terrible tragedy, which has brought us all here and listening in. Many, many articles and videos and opinions of Sarah have gone out in the airways and on the webs. Opinions that have been formed and commented on so much that it's hard not to give into the temptation to treat people like a comic book or a fictional character. In the case of my friend Sarah, the words narcissist, Karen, villain, many other things, they roll off the tongue with little regard to the humanity that is dismissed so flippantly. And under a lot of circumstances, I was one of those people, as I have a love of true crime. And becoming friends with Sarah has shown me that there's a lot more depth to the people I see on the screen. I'd like to share with the world and with the court about the Sarah Boone that I know. Sarah Boone is a kind, honest, and good person. The Sarah Boone I know is one who loves animals, especially the kind who are damaged and defenseless. How many of us would take in and pour love for a hearing impaired and a sight impaired pair of dogs? She has a natural instinct to help reach out and give of herself, her time and energy and love, especially to those who are hurting or damaged. You all have seen her fight for her own life and truth here. I tell you this, she fights even harder for those she loves, giving time, attention, and companionship without a single thought for her own gain or what somebody can do for her. And one huge example is in the matter of our friendship. As I said before, I have end-stage renal disease caused by a genetic illness called polycystic kidney disease. As my life has progressed, things I have taken for granted have been taken away from me. I could not appear in court in person because I can no longer walk, as my dialysis treatments have affected the circulation of my legs and has confined me to a wheelchair. To say that my life has radically changed is an understatement. Through it all, I have many friends and family I love and cherish. Sarah has distinguished herself differently in this way. In the course of getting to know her, I started sharing the progressing state of my health. It was like lightning had struck her. The moment Sarah had learned the depth of my struggles health-wise, she straight up offered strenuously to donate a kidney to me. I got to tell you this. I hope she's not mad for me showing this, but she had no hesitation, no concern over personal risk or personal gain. I want to convey to this, out and around the world, that is merely offering is a good and heroic act. I've had many friends. I've not had one outside of my brother who has offered me a kidney. That is huge. I don't have anything of equal value to give to her. And that's not the actions of a narcissist. She did it as a reflex action, as a good person. After the verdict came in October, we spoke that night. And I hope Sarah doesn't get mad at me again for disclosing this, but out of all the shock and seriousness of what had happened in the court, the thing that made her emotionally break was that she realized she could no longer be a donor to me. I mean, I was sitting there like, hey, you know, it's going to be okay. But she was so broken up, she couldn't help me. That's a friend. She is not, nor does she come up anywhere remotely close to being a narcissist. Now, one more thing before I go. Social media has worked to rip the blindfold off of Lady Justice, to take the sword out of her right hand and start assassinating Sarah's character. However, the scales are the balance. As it says in Psalm 85, mercy and truth are met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed each other. Justice isn't justice without mercy. Our pursuit of righteousness isn't complete and right without peace. Thank you, Your Honor, for the honor of speaking for my friend Sarah Boone.
I mean, that's a first. You know, somebody that she's known for 11 months through chatting while she's incarcerated testifies at her sentencing.
And as you point out, a fan of true crime, and you know, the Sarah Boone just maligned all social media channels and especially true crime channels. And now one of her best friends, the name is Miss Lana Alpert, by the way. Now, Miss Alpert is a big fan. Apparently, she must not despise true crime channels that much, or true crime listeners that much, if she's befriended one.
Or social media, as she used it to her ability to get her attorney, as she fired all of her attorneys over and over again and wrote a letter, remember, from jail that she knew would be published on social media, and requested an attorney. But yes, back to Lana and Lana's testimony. I mean, nothing against Lana. I feel like Lana was manipulated, but wow.
When I hear Lana speak there, I just think, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is how lonely. I just feel like Lana must be really lonely.
Yeah.
And that's a part of that story. You know, in fact, when I heard that, I thought, I don't know if you're familiar with, it's not exactly like this, but Nathaniel West wrote a book called Miss Lonely Hearts, which is like kind of a classic story about loneliness and people taking advantage of other people. And I mean, I just feel bad that Lana is, it seems like Lana's obviously having a hard time, and really, for whatever reasons, needed to connect to Sarah, felt some connection to Sarah Boone, and reached out to her, and they developed a friendship. And whether the kidney offer is sincere or authentic, I don't know. You know, I think it's very debatable, but I guess if she was acquitted, maybe. I don't think you can donate organs in prison, from prison or jail.
I don't think you can. No, because that would become a really weird business very
Right.
quickly among,
Right.
yes. So no, that's
Yeah.
not a thing. As someone else pointed out, Sarah will donate an organ but won't unzip a suitcase.
Suitcase, yeah, right. So, you know, right. So what's the motive?
Right. And other people saying, yeah, you cannot, as we all know, you cannot donate organs from jail, and Sarah is well
Right.
aware. Right.
Right. So she had to know that it was not a real offer. It wasn't an authentic offer to donate her. I mean,
Right. Not to mention, a random person would probably not be a match.
Right. Exactly. That's a factor.
Yes. Right. But yeah,
I think, you know, there's so much here. You know, we talk about this a lot. There's so much. Nobody wins, right? Like, there's so much here that's tragic,
yes.
in the sense that Sarah Boone, like, you know, there's a part of me that thinks, in spite of all her hubris and narcissism, if that's what it is, like, there's a part of me that thinks she really does want to be a good person, that she's really capable of that at some level.
Mhm.
Right? Like, if one of the things I was a little surprised to see here was that, you know, sometimes one of my roles in pre-sentencing hearings, or, you know, is to evaluate risk. And this particular scenario is fairly unusual in the sense that you have someone who's experienced domestic violence. They're really drunk, right? She's really inebriated. She's totally intoxicated that night. You can see it from the video. She's got so much anger.
Yeah.
You know, it like one of the things forensic evaluators always ask is how much of this is the situation and how much of it is the person? And that's a really critical question to ask, because if a crime is largely driven by situational factors, then it's less likely to repeat itself. If a crime, on the other hand, is driven more by person-related factors like someone's character or personality, then it's much more likely that that person will continue to commit crimes because it's a part of who they are. And I don't know, I didn't evaluate Sarah. I've never met with her. Obviously, nobody did apparently wanted to do any personality testing with her anyway. But if you look at that breakdown, person versus situation here, I think a fair amount of this or some of this is situational.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's the likelihood? How often did they play this suitcase game? Was this a total aberration? So she's got all this anger. She's a victim of domestic violence. They play this game, whatever. Like they play this suitcase game. She sees that as an opportunity to zip him up, to maybe hurt him, at least toy with him, at least exert power over him, which is something she seems to have done in the relationship. But she's really intoxicated. And it's feasible to think that she taunted him, and for whatever reasons, like she passed out more or less. Like that's not to say I'm not excusing what she did.
You're giving her the benefit of the doubt right now. If you were her defense,
I'm saying that if you look at the risk of this happening again, I'm saying that those circumstances are unlikely to repeat themselves over and over in the future. And so the risk of her committing a similar crime would have to be fairly low. I mean, I'm not sure I would give her low risk overall, by the way, because I don't know all the personality issues involved here with her. But I'm just saying, like, part of the tragedy here is I don't think that this type of scenario would repeat itself.
right?
Right? You could argue that this is kind of a one-off situation.
Well, we didn't, we were busy in Delphi during the entire trial, and what came out though in the trial was a lot of abuse by her too.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
that wasn't the only time. So I doubt that her risk is low. But
no, I don't think it's low. I'm saying that there's a tragic component to this in the sense that, a child's lost his mother.
Yes.
That if she wasn't drunk that night, maybe she does unzip the suitcase. I don't know. There's a lot of contingencies here where maybe this could have been avoided, and maybe the situational elements were strong, and that in other words, I guess what I'm saying is I think this crime was totally preventable. That
So you don't think it was
I
Go
don't
ahead.
think it was premeditated necessarily.
don't?
I mean, again, I didn't see the whole trial, so I can't really.
Yeah, I see. I think it could be.
Well, I think it's premeditated in the sense that once he's in that suitcase, his fate is sealed.
Yeah, I think I agree.
But I don't. What I mean is,
what couple plays hide and seek? I don't know. I think she got him in there. But
well, I don't know. My point is, whatever that is, my point is that to some degree, this is tragic for everyone involved, including her. That, I think that's how she felt, at least. Like I think she felt like it was an accident and it could have been avoided. And, I don't know, maybe if she's not drinking, does she do this? If she's not intoxicated, I don't know.
yeah. Right. She had a bat too that night. You know, some people think she used the bat to get him in there. You know, and according to the trial, she was abusive other times. So
And again, you know, I work with a lot of offenders who say, well, I was, you know, dropped down drunk. So of course I committed the crime. Right. And like, no,
she
that's not
denied
the-
it. She denied it. She said, I wasn't drunk. Yeah.
No, I know she did, but I mean, like, you can listen to the video and she's slurring her speech. Maybe, you know, unless she's doing a lot of narcotics or something. I don't. Yeah. So, maybe she hasn't slept in a few days, but it seems unlikely.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else you want to say, babe?
Nope. I think that's just, you know, in some ways, I think this whole thing is, I don't know. It's just tragic, and it could have been prevented, I think, easily, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here, babe. And watching the sentencing, it was wild. It was wild. And I'm grateful though that justice was served for George and for his family, and the judge, in my opinion, made the right choice. The right sentence.
And by the way, on this issue, like, if they didn't go for murder one. So I mean,
Right.
even the DA didn't see this as necessarily premeditated. They saw it as second degree. So
Yeah. It's an easier conviction to get.
right. So I don't, you know, even the DA didn't believe that they had enough evidence to show that, you know, she was mapping this out a couple days before, or even a few hours before or something. So
Yeah.
um,
Well, we better run. We have something
Okay.
actually in 5 minutes, but
okay, yeah.
all right. All right. Thank you everyone for being here, and 2 times in 2 days. Anything else? Sorry, babe. Anything else you want to say?
No, just thanks. Thank you, Gems, for joining us for this holiday special. You know, maybe we'll have, it seems like, you know, you were gone for a while and I was kind of on the shelf there for a bit. So I think we're going to be coming back with more holiday specials. So thanks for
Yeah.
joining us.
Yes, and thank you to our moderators too so much tonight. We'll see ya. Bye-bye.
Good night.